If you have teenagers in the home, more than likely you've wrestled with the fact that they might be tired a lot, maybe tired in the morning, especially. And it's natural for us in those moments to just kind of medicate it, to give them some kind of energy boost, whether that's coffee or maybe an energy drink or some way that we can kind of wake them up. But we know that that's not always good for their health. And so, how do we bring up these topics, especially when much in society and the culture says that you should always be awake for all the things and be a part of everything? And what do we do with our kids when they're tired then? Do we just encourage them maybe to take a hit of sugar and some energy drinks and kind of perk back up? Or is there a better way to approach this? Well, today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in our daily segment, Facing the Dark, Dr. Kathy has some good insight for us on this. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, in July, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency recalled more than 24 energy drink brands due to caffeine content that's higher than the legal limit of 180 milligrams per serving. That's in Canada. Now, research shows the majority of teens don't really get enough sleep, so many are now turning to energy drinks to feel more awake during the school day. And I would say that it's kind of fairly easy to see that the big companies are lying to kids about the effects of caffeine and what it does to teens' emotional health, but also their physical health, right? And this is happening not just for teens, but also for people in college. What are your thoughts on kids and caffeine and how it affects kids, especially if they start taking caffeine? What I would say maybe is too early, but I don't know when a time is that we should introduce them to that. What are your thoughts there on it?
I don't know either. Oh, you're stumping me today. It's an interesting question. I have never researched it. I would say off the top of my head that caffeine is an artificial stimulant, so you want to keep it away from kids as long as we possibly can. And we need to get them stimulated by exercise and, fruits and vegetables, right? Let's just go out there and say that. I think there is some evidence that caffeine can actually help children who are ADD, ADHD-ness. And so there's some truth to that. And that would be, I would think a pediatrician would weigh into that. Medication plus this much caffeine or caffeine instead. It's so weird. It tends to settle them down rather than ramp them up. But they need to understand if kids take these drinks, they're so unhealthy. And they need to understand the later you take them in the day, the worse you're going to sleep at night. I mean, I've been foolish sometimes, even with an innocent soft drink at dinner, thinking, I won't be affected by this. And then I don't sleep as long, as well, as deeply. And I'm affected for at least the next day. So let's teach our kids, if this is something that you feel you have to do, and I would say it's not, but if you feel it is, no later than 12 noon. You get tired after that. There's not an option. You do 10 jumping jacks and drink a lot of water. Water is the intellectual energy drink. 80% of our body is water. About 78% of our brain is water, and water will feed you what you need to stay alert. So I think we need to be teaching that. And the other thing I'm going to say, and it won't surprise our listeners, is that if you start young, you're going to need more and more caffeine to stay more and more alert. It's like any addictive substance. Eventually, it stops working, and you have to have more and more. And you don't want your kids in that cycle. That's going to be very dangerous for them.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And, we've talked about this a lot actually here on Facing the Dark, because we've talked about kind of the role of sleep. And over the summer, we had one conversation specifically on how sleep is the most important gift you can give your kids in the summertime. But there are incredible pressures that our kids are dealing with, especially as they're back at school and they're juggling so many different things, from like friends to schoolwork. And then we kind of tell them also sleep is important, And so in many ways, they're juggling all of these things, and we're telling them to hold on to all three of them at the same time, really tightly. We ask them these questions when they call us on the phone when they're at college or when they come home from school. We talk to them about the importance of all these things. Are we calling them to too many things that are maybe good? Is there maybe a hierarchy that we should kind of place on this? How should we approach this, knowing that our kids are really feeling a lot of weight and pressure from so many different angles here?
Yeah, great question again, Wayne. Yeah, friends are important. School's obviously vital to today and tomorrow. Without a decent high school education that we invest in, our life will be negatively affected by that. Friends are important. A lot of our kids are working outside of the home already. Others are doing, major chores in the home, which they should be doing. A lot of them are involved in sports and extracurricular kinds of things. And it is tough This is where parents have to say no for their kids. And we limit, for the health of the family. Like if you have more than one kid, you can have 2 or 3 or 4 kids each in a different season, or, 3 kids in the same season on 3 different soccer teams, and you're running yourself ragged trying to get to practices and games. That's not good for the parents. It's not good for the kids. It's not good for little kids who never get to sleep through a nap. So the busyness affects not just the child who's busy, but the family dynamic and the stress and the lack of, I think, community in the home, even though we're living together. And I will go on record to say boldly that sleep affects everything. There is so much data on that. Sleep affects long life. Sleep affects emotional wellness. Sleep affects intellectual integrity and attitudes and emotions. And so I would say, boy, sleep matters. And does that mean that our family slows down? Yes, it might mean that you make a short sacrifice for long-term gain.
Yeah, I think that's really a hard decision to make, and often it comes with a lot of conversation. And in our house, we have some kids that conversation is really easy to have. They're really compliant. And then we have kids in our house that are just like me, and they're not nice to live with, right? They're challenges. They make everything a hard conversation. There's all these questions. And so I know that there are some kind of approaches to this where we kind of just incite curiosity, kind of this, so why do you take so much caffeine? Why do you drink so much coffee? And it kind of can help initiate conversations with teens. But I'd like to hear you kind of talk about this. Do you have any tips for parents to kind of set the stage for these conversations where kids might kind of be willing to hear you out on something that they believe, or maybe even something that they love, like coffee or their favorite energy drink, and how that might actually be harmful? How can we kind of initiate these conversations, or maybe kind of set the table for these conversations to happen?
I love that, because you're implying that we should be talking about these things. And yes, we should. I love this idea of curiosity because it makes it more probable that new ideas will stick with children if either they've become curious and we're available to them. So we need to be available. We need to put our phones down and be present in their lives so they'll talk to us and not ask Siri a question. And we need to, again, have answers and admit when we don't, so we don't look like fools and mislead them. So we have, guidance counselors and pastors on speed dial, and we talk to a learned neighbor who has kids 10 years older than ours and has walked, through some of the same challenges or whatever. And it reminds me of, it's when I taught second graders, and even at the university, I used to teach something called cognitive conflict. So one of the best ways to increase curiosity is to have their brain go, ouch, or have their brain goes, whoa, that's a weird idea. And I used to do this with second graders to get them to be attentive. And I've taught it many times. One of my favorite ways to teach cognitive conflict, get ready, is to say, have you noticed on an Oreo cookie that there is a symbol on the front of all of them? So on the wafer, on one of the 2 wafers, there is an engraved stamp, if you will. I know what that stands for. I bet you don't know. And you can go find out, and you will be fascinated by what it means. Now, a minute ago, nobody listening to me cared about Oreo cookies at all, or at least what the stamp was, if there even was one. Now I've implied I know something you don't know, and I've implied that you might enjoy the answer, and some of you are going to go try to Google that, if you will, and maybe the Nabisco website has it on there. Maybe you can Google it and find it, but it's kind of fun. So that's called cognitive conflict, kind of creating a curiosity climate. Those kinds of things can be done. It's good ideas.
I really like what Dr. Kathy has to say here. I think that it's really important for us to maybe build spaces for our kids to be able to talk through some challenging things, or maybe even just to share that they're tired. It's something that I think Jesus kind of broaches with the disciples in Matthew chapter 11, and I'm going to begin reading at verse 28. And this is what Jesus says: "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, I know that Jesus is really kind of speaking to the disciples here. He's really giving them a perspective on what it means to truly fall underneath his teaching and underneath his direction. That the way that Jesus is encouraging the disciples is really kind of unique. And I think as parents, we can kind of do that for our kids too. That maybe when we look at kind of guiding them or training them or pushing them in these different things that we think that they're really good at, that there might be kind of a different approach to that. One that opens up conversation, one that allows them to kind of share that they might be tired, or we might need to reconsider what goals we kind of set before them. And I think what Dr. Kathy has to say here is really helpful, but I think there's also a dynamic of this that we need to teach our children that rest is really good. It's really important for them, that God has designed us in His image, and in that image, God rested on the seventh day. And so it's important for our kids to understand that rest is also a good thing, and that we can do that and build that into our lives. I think doing that will be a bright light that can cut through some of these stressors that our kids might feel when they're exhausted and wanting to turn to something that's going to perk them up. Maybe the best way to perk them up is just some simple rest. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast. In this, our daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender, and we're really looking forward to seeing you here again next week.